Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. We'll explore a case that occurred in the Philippines in 2021, which shocked all of Southeast Asia at the time. On December 10th, 2021, as the Magwad couple was preparing to leave for work, they suddenly heard Janice call out Mom. Dad. This call deeply moved them. Janice was their adopted daughter, and this was the first time she had addressed the Magwads in this way since they had adopted her a few months earlier. They were overjoyed that their care and love had been reciprocated and acknowledged by their daughter. However, this joy would last only a few hours, as a tragedy was about to unfold in their family. At 2:48 p.m., Janice sent a message to the family chat group saying that 3 burglars had broken into their house. Shortly after, she posted a plea for help on social media. By 3 p.m., after seeing the message on Cruz Magwad's phone, one of his colleagues pushed open his office door and said worriedly, "It seems your house has been broken into. You should go check right away." Hearing this, jumped up in panic and rushed home. About 15 minutes later, Cruz arrived home by car. At this point, all he knew was that his house was being burglarized, and even more terrifying, his 3 children were all inside. When he reached the door, he realized he had left his keys at work in his haste. The front door was locked, and despite Cruz's efforts to push it open, it wouldn't budge. So he began banging on the door and calling out the names of his 3 children. But no matter how loudly he shouted, there was no response. He then ran around the house yelling their names. Fortunately, the back door was unlocked. However, the inside of the house was eerily quiet. Cruz suddenly realized that the burglars might still be inside, holding the children hostage, which was why they couldn't respond. Therefore, he decided to keep quiet and see if he could stealthily approach and find a way to rescue the children. Cruz then tiptoed through the kitchen. But when he entered the living room, he was met with a horrifying sight. The entire room was in disarray, and a strong, nauseating smell of blood hit his nostrils. Shards of a broken vase were scattered everywhere, and the carpet was soaked in blood. His 2 children lay motionless on the floor, their bodies covered in wounds and stab marks. Beside them were a knife, a hammer, and a baseball bat. His 16-year-old son, Luis, lay dead near the front door, his body covered in blood, his hands tied, and something stuffed in his mouth. His 18-year-old daughter, Gwen, lay near the bedroom door in an even more tragic state. Her entire body was covered in wounds, especially her face, which was completely disfigured. One of her ears had even been cut off. Later reports showed that Gwen's hands and arms were full of knife wounds, indicating that she had tried to resist until the very end. Seeing this scene, Cruz fell to his knees beside his children, sobbing in agony. But after a moment, he tried to calm himself. He remembered that he still had an adopted daughter, Janice, and he needed to find her quickly. Then took out his phone to call Janice while quickly running towards her room, praying that he wouldn't find another dead body. However, Janice's door was locked tight and her phone was unreachable. Cruz kept calling out her name loudly. Then, an unexpected scene unfolded. Janice opened the door and ran towards Cruz, crying. Seeing Janice soaking wet, Cruz panicked. Thinking it was blood, he quickly checked her all over. Fortunately, Janice wasn't injured at all. In her panic, Janice shakily explained to Cruz that 3 men had broken into the house to rob them. She was scared, so she hid under the bed. She heard Gwen and Louis screaming, but couldn't help. Finally, when everything went quiet, Janice didn't know what to do, so she took a shower. This explanation was clearly illogical. Cruz felt something was odd, but he thought his daughter was too frightened, so he didn't ask any more questions. After calming Janice down, Cruz called the police and informed his wife, La Vela, who was at work. The incident shocked the entire town. It was a small town where everyone knew each other. The Magwad family was known for their kindness. Cruz was a high school teacher, and La Vela was an elementary school principal. Although their teaching income wasn't high, they were financially comfortable due to inherited land and a pig farm from their grandparents. Their eldest daughter, Gwen, born in 2003, a smart, outgoing, and energetic girl. In high school, Gwen enrolled in a pre-med program, hoping to become a doctor in the future. Their youngest son, Louis, born in 2005, loved reading, drawing, and playing guitar. Though only 16, he had clear goals and wanted to become a lawyer in the future. Their family was always harmonious and full of love. Under their parents' guidance, Gwen and Louis were enthusiastic about participating in charitable activities. On weekends, the family often visited nursing homes and orphanages, donating to those in need. As teachers, the Magwads frequently helped poor students. It was through this kindness that they met Janice. In early 2021, the Magwad family was invited to a party. There, noticed a housemaid who looked about her age. So, she approached to introduce herself. The maid's name was Janice, a year younger than Gwen. They quickly became close due to their shared interests. But Gwen wondered why a 17-year-old girl wasn't in school and had to work as a maid for others. When Gwen asked, Janice emotionally recounted her life story. She couldn't remember anything about her life before age 8. In Janice's memory, she was a child without parents. At 8, she was abandoned on a large ship like a forgotten package. Luckily, a kind person posted her photo online, hoping to find her parents. But no one recognized Janice. After that, she was taken to an orphanage. Janice lived there for 8 years until she was 16, when a kind couple hired her as a maid, promising to pay her regularly. Although the work wasn't easy, Janice was grateful for the opportunity. At least she had a place to call home. Janice's sad story deeply moved Gwen. The two girls began to talk frequently. Gwen introduced Janice to many of her friends and family. Their relationship grew closer, and they became inseparable friends. After 6 months, Gwen and her brother felt their relationship with Janice had surpassed ordinary friendship. They came up with the idea of asking their parents to adopt Janice. Gwen, being kind-hearted, thought Janice deserved the same good education she had to pursue her dreams in the future. When they heard this suggestion from their children, the Magwad couple felt quite worried. First, since Janice was already 17, they found it difficult to know how to educate her appropriately. Second, they worried that the new environment might make Janice uncomfortable and cause new emotional wounds. So the family discussed this issue many times. It was clear that all the family's concerns stemmed from their fear of not being able to provide a better life for Janice. Finally, due to Gwen's persistence, the Magwads decided to officially adopt Janice and provide her with educational opportunities. In July 2021, Janice moved in with her new family and changed her name to Janice Magwad. Louis gave up his room for her and moved to sleep on the living room sofa. To welcome their new member, the family organized a vacation together. During the trip, they took many photos as mementos. Janice had now become a beloved member of the family. However, this change required both sides to go through an adjustment period. In her new family, Janice had to learn to follow family rules. At the same time, the other family members needed to be more understanding and tolerant towards her. An incident occurred just a few months after Janice's adoption. It was during the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. Was busy applying for college while also tutoring Janice. At that time, Gwen's grandparents had contracted COVID-19 and needed to be quarantined, so they needed money for food and medicine. Fortunately, Cruz had just sold some piglets and earned $200. He had put this money in a piggy bank for emergencies. But when he broke open the piggy bank to get the money, it was completely empty. Cruz asked his wife and children, but no one knew where the money had gone. They even suspected that a thief had broken in. But strangely, nothing else was missing, and someone was almost always at home. So the whole family started searching everywhere. While looking under the carpet in the room, they accidentally picked up Janice's school bag. Due to the pandemic, schools had switched to online learning. Although Janice's bag didn't have many books, it was surprisingly heavy. Upon closer inspection, they discovered a hidden compartment at the bottom of the bag, and the lost money was there. At this moment, the Magwads felt not anger but sadness and disappointment. They looked at Janice with confused eyes, hoping for an explanation. Janice cried and said, "I'm so sorry, I don't know why I did it." She understood that because of this, she would lose her parents' trust and might even be kicked out of the house. Although the Magwads felt deeply hurt, they tried to understand Janice. They believed that since she had lacked affection from a young age, she didn't have the same sense of security as Gwen and Louis. Therefore, Janice's actions likely stemmed from a psychology of deprivation, as she had once worried about where her next meal would come from. So the Magwad family forgave Janice. Because she was now their child, they felt she needed more love and understanding. They wanted Janice to know that as long as she was part of this family, she would never have to worry about money again. However, on December 10th, everything fell apart completely. When Cruz received the call about the horrific incident, Lovala rushed home, embracing her husband and adopted daughter, sobbing outside the house. Meanwhile, the police were busy collecting evidence inside. They then interrogated Janice, the only surviving witness. She stated that she and Gwyn were in their room, while Lewis was in the living room. Suddenly, they heard Lewis scream along with the sound of objects breaking, so they immediately ran out to see what was happening. They saw 3 strangers suddenly appear in the living room. 2 of them were beating Lewis with a hammer and a baseball bat, while the third stabbed him with a knife. When they spotted Gwyn and Janice, they rushed towards them and caught Gwyn. Taking advantage of her sister's struggle, Janice ran into the room and hid under the bed. During this time, she sent a distress message to the family chat group and posted a plea for help on social media. Janice also recounted that although the robbers later came into the room to look for her, they fortunately didn't discover her hiding under the bed. This case puzzled the Philippine police. Despite abundant evidence at the scene, they still couldn't understand the full sequence of events. First, the front door was locked from the inside and showed no signs of forced entry. Second, nothing in the house was missing, which clearly didn't fit the scenario of a robbery homicide. Upon inspection, the police found that Janice's bed was clearly visible upon entering the room. So if the robbers had really entered, they couldn't have missed seeing her. By December 13th, when the autopsy results came in, the case became even more perplexing. Both victims had died from excessive blood loss, but before being stabbed to death, they had endured extremely brutal beatings. Gwyn in particular had her face cut with a knife to the point of being unrecognizable. Experts suggested that this behavior usually stems from jealousy or hatred. As for Lewis, he had been stabbed 51 times. If this was really the act of robbers, why would they be so brutal to 2 children? These wounds seemed more like an act of venting anger than covering up evidence. Moreover, according to further investigation, Gwyn had been killed before Lewis, which clearly didn't match Janice's testimony. Additionally, forensic doctors determined that the siblings were murdered around 2 p.m., while the time Janice posted her plea for help was at 2:48 p.m. Furthermore, Janice's distress message also seemed odd. In such a dire situation, she still remembered to add emojis to her message, which was very strange. Not only that, but the presence of the murder weapons at the scene was also illogical. The hammer and baseball bat were actually belongings of the Magwad family. The hammer was Cruz's tool for repairing things, and he usually kept it in a drawer in the laundry room. He was certain that only Gwyn Janice, and he knew where the hammer was kept. The baseball bat belonged to Lewis, and it was usually kept on the top bunk in his bedroom, which was now Janice's room. Typically, burglars who break into homes bring their own weapons, or use easily visible objects as weapons. But these 2 items were clearly not something that strangers could easily find on their first visit to the house. Immediately after the incident, Janice posted a memorial for Gwyn and Lewis on social media, which quickly received much sympathy. However, shocking discoveries were made shortly after when investigating her social media accounts. It turned out that Janice wasn't an orphan, and she had even been in contact with her birth mother through social media over the years. Many years ago, after her parents divorced, her father left their 5 children in the mother's care. In difficult circumstances, her mother was forced to let the children fend for themselves. After entering the orphanage, Janice went through many hardships before finally being adopted by the Magwad family. Her birth mother was aware of this at the time. This information quickly reached the Magwads. However, as the police were still investigating the case, they maintained a polite and compassionate attitude, imploring people not to make malicious speculations since Janice was still under 18. While rumors were spreading, the police also expanded their investigation. Soon after, they discovered a bag of blood-soaked women's clothes carefully wrapped in the drainage of the stream behind the Magwad house. The blood stains on the clothes were confirmed to be from Gwyn and Lewis, while the clothes belonged to Janice. The final breakthrough in the case was discovered by Lavella. After losing her 2 children, Lavella was in extreme pain. To control her sadness and avoid breaking down, she tried to keep herself busy by meticulously cleaning the entire house. While cleaning Janice's room, Lavella discovered a strange ID card and immediately turned it over to the police. It was the ID of a 17-year-old teenager named Marlon. Although Lavella had never met this teenager, her neighbors had seen him. Many witnesses stated that they had seen Marlon heading towards the Magwad house on the day of the incident. A store owner even confirmed that Marlon had come into his store and asked which house belonged to the Magwad family. Another motorcycle driver also reported that he had given Marlon a ride there. Faced with this crucial evidence, the police immediately interrogated Janice. Under pressure, she admitted to knowing Marlon. He was a friend she had met while working at the church. In the presence of a lawyer, Janice also confessed that she and Marlon were responsible for killing Gwyn and Lewis. The police immediately arrested Marlon and Janice. Moreover, they found Gwyn's phone in his backpack. Although Marlon and Janice were arrested, their motive remained a mystery. During questioning, Marlon stated that on the day of the incident, he saw his girlfriend's plea for help on social media. He immediately called Janice, but when the call connected, there was only silence on the other end. After a few seconds of silence, he hung up, assuming it might be a joke from his girlfriend. This explanation seems strange. Either the man was incredibly insensitive, or he was too accustomed to such dramatic acts from his girlfriend. Otherwise, it's hard to understand how someone could see such a post and not be concerned, especially from their own girlfriend. During interrogation, Janice admitted she was very jealous of Gwyn. Gwyn was both smart and beautiful, and had been loved by many since childhood, while Janice had nothing. Perhaps on the very morning of the incident, when Janice first called the Magwad's mom and dad, she decided she would become their only child and monopolize their love. Later, police found messages on Janice's phone sent to Marlon after her adoption, stating she wanted to kill 7 people, though she didn't specify who these 7 were. On December 16, 2021, Janice and Marlon were placed in a juvenile detention center. The case entered a prolonged trial phase. During this time, the Magwads held a funeral for their 2 unfortunate children. Surprisingly, Janice's birth mother appeared at the funeral. She knelt before the Magwads to apologize for her daughter's actions. By May 2022, Janice was sentenced to 32 years in prison for premeditated murder, while Marlon received a 29-year sentence, both without possibility of parole. However, as they were both minors, they would officially begin serving their sentences at age 21. This verdict outraged the Magwads and many Filipino citizens. In fact, Lovala had once considered forgiving Janice due to her religious beliefs. But during her detention, Janice showed no signs of remorse or regret. Many people believe that the negligence of Janice's birth parents and social welfare agencies had turned her into a monster, ultimately causing tragedy for the Magwad family. After Gwyn and Lewis's deaths, the Magwads frequently visited their children's graves on holidays and anniversaries. Lovala soon returned to school to continue her educational work. In August 2022, Cruz opened a restaurant serving Gwyn and Lewis's favorite dishes to honor their memory. Story 2: The case takes place on the southwest side of Hong Kong Island. Here lies a small island named Aberdeen, which covers only 0.5 square miles, but is home to 90,000 people. The main character in this story is a 25-year-old woman named Yu Hui, who worked as an accountant. She was a great communicator with many friends. At one point, she had her romantic fortune read online, which indicated that her love life was flourishing. However, a master later warned her, "You need to exercise restraint. If you're not careful, you could face deadly consequences." Unfortunately, this ominous prediction came true in a horrifying way. So what exactly happened? Let's rewind to October 27, 2010. It was a Wednesday, and around 8:30 a.m. some people were fishing along the coast of Aberdeen. The morning sun was shining brightly. The sea breeze gently blew across the sand, and the ocean sparkled like silver. However, in stark contrast to this idyllic scene, near the trash dump on Leonon Road, the fishermen noticed something unusual floating in the water. Curious, they set down their fishing rods and walked closer to investigate. What they found was shocking: the partially clothed body of a woman, drifting in the water. After regaining their composure, they immediately called the police. The police quickly arrived at the scene and brought the victim's body to shore. The victim was a woman, approximately 5 feet 3 inches, around 25 years old. She was found face down, with her back facing the sky. She was wearing a gray top, but nothing below the waist. There were some injuries on her hands and neck, though they weren't severe. It appeared that she might have collided with some rocks while drifting in the sea. That evening, news outlets reported on the incident, and the following day, several people came forward to identify the body. The police confirmed the victim's identity as 25-year-old Yu Hui. The day before, her parents had received a call from her coworkers asking why she hadn't shown up for work. Confused, they mentioned that their daughter hadn't slept at home the previous night, but had called to let them know. Throughout the day, they tried unsuccessfully to contact her. It wasn't until that evening, when they saw the news on TV, that they were horrified to recognize the body found at Aberdeen as their daughter. It was then they suspected something terrible had happened to her. Since the victim had recently passed away, her face was only slightly swollen and deformed. Along with a smallpox vaccination scar on her arm, her parents were certain it was their daughter. According to the investigation, Yue was born in 1985 in Huizhou, China. At 12 years old, she moved to Hong Kong with her family. She was the eldest of 5 siblings, and the entire family of 7 lived together in Kue Chung, Hong Kong. Yue graduated with a degree in tourism from the Hong Kong Institute of Vocational Education. After graduation, she changed jobs multiple times over the course of 3 years. Before her death, she worked as an accountant at a company in Shenzhen and was considering a job change. Yue was beautiful and had many admirers, but none of her relationships lasted long, mostly involving co-workers she met through work. Her close friend Jenny mentioned, Yue always caught everyone's attention. Many guys were infatuated with her. However, she had a strong desire to marry a foreigner and settle abroad, so she paid special attention to foreign men. She frequently visited Lan Kwai Fong, a popular area for bars, and continuously searched for a suitable boyfriend. In February 2010, Yue met a German colleague named Thomas. They quickly became romantically involved, and after just 2 months of dating, she introduced him to her parents. Surprisingly, Janice's birth mother appeared at the funeral. She knelt before the Magwads to apologize for her daughter's actions. By May 2022, Janice was sentenced to 32 years in prison for premeditated murder, while Marlon received a 29-year sentence, both without possibility of parole. However, as they were both minors, they would officially begin serving their sentences at age 21. This verdict outraged the Magwads and many Filipino citizens. In fact, Lovola had once considered forgiving Janice due to her religious beliefs. But during her detention, Janice showed no signs of remorse or regret. Many people believed that the negligence of Janice's birth parents and social welfare agencies had turned her into a monster, ultimately causing tragedy for the Magwad family. After Gwyn and Lewis's deaths, the Magwads frequently visited their children's graves on holidays and anniversaries. Lavella soon returned to school to continue her educational work. In August 2022, Cruz opened a restaurant serving Gwyn and Lewis's favorite dishes to honor their memory. Story 2: The case takes place on the southwest side of Hong Kong Island. Here lies a small island named Aberdeen, which covers only 0.5 square miles, but is home to 90,000 people. The main character in this story is a 25-year-old woman named Yu Huiyu, who worked as an accountant. She was a great communicator with many friends. At one point, she had her romantic fortune read online, which indicated that her love life was flourishing. However, a master later warned her, "You need to exercise restraint. If you're not careful, you could face deadly consequences." Unfortunately, this ominous prediction came true in a horrifying way. So what exactly happened? Let's rewind to October 27, 2010. It was a Wednesday, and around 8:30 a.m. some people were fishing along the coast of Aberdeen. The morning sun was shining brightly. The sea breeze gently blew across the sand, and the ocean sparkled like silver. However, in stark contrast to this idyllic scene, near the trash dump on Leonon Road, the fishermen noticed something unusual floating in the water. Curious, they set down their fishing rods and walked closer to investigate. What they found was shocking: the partially clothed body of a woman drifting in the water. After regaining their composure, they immediately called the police. The police quickly arrived at the scene and brought the victim's body to shore. The victim was a woman, approximately 5 feet 3 inches, around 25 years old. She was found face down, with her back facing the sky. She was wearing a gray top, but nothing below the waist. There were some injuries on her hands and neck, though they weren't severe. It appeared that she might have collided with some rocks while drifting in the sea. That evening, news outlets reported on the incident, and the following day, several people came forward to identify the body. The police confirmed the victim's identity as 25-year-old Yu Huiyu. The day before, her parents had received a call from her coworkers, asking why she hadn't shown up for work. Confused, they mentioned that their daughter hadn't slept at home the previous night, but had called to let them know. Throughout the day, they tried unsuccessfully to contact her. It wasn't until that evening, when they saw the news on TV, that they were horrified to recognize the body found at Aberdeen as their daughter. It was then they suspected something terrible had happened to her. Since the victim had recently passed away, her face was only slightly swollen and deformed. Along with a smallpox vaccination scar on her arm, her parents were certain it was their daughter. According to the investigation, Yuhui was born in 1985 in Huizhou, China. At 12 years old, she moved to Hong Kong with her family. She was the eldest of 5 siblings, and the entire family of 7 lived together in Kue Chung, Hong Kong. Yuhui graduated with a degree in tourism from the Hong Kong Institute of Vocational Education. After graduation, she changed jobs multiple times over the course of 3 years. Before her death, she worked as an accountant at a company in Shenzhen and was considering a job change. Yuhui was beautiful and had many admirers, but none of her relationships lasted long, mostly involving co-workers she met through work. Her close friend Jenny mentioned, Yuhui always caught everyone's attention. Many guys were infatuated with her. However, she had a strong desire to marry a foreigner and settle abroad. So she paid special attention to foreign men. She frequently visited Lan Kwai Fong, a popular area for bars, and continuously searched for a suitable boyfriend. In February 2010, Yuhui met a German colleague named Thomas. They quickly became romantically involved, and after just 2 months of dating, she introduced him to her parents. She even made their relationship public on social media, writing Ich liebe dich, I love you in German, on her profile to express her feelings for him. Thomas also vowed, I will take you to Germany to live with me. However, Thomas was later transferred to Beijing for work, and their relationship ended. Yuhui's dream of moving abroad seemed within reach, but it ultimately fell apart. Devastated and desperate, she sought guidance from a master fortune teller. The master predicted, you have a strong romantic fortune, but I advise you to remain virtuous. If you continue to live recklessly at best, you'll lose everything, and at worst you could face deadly consequences. Since then, Yuhui followed the master's advice and started to make changes. Previously, she would often go out drinking with male friends until late at night and let them take her home. But after listening to the master, she began to go out drinking alone and took a taxi home by herself. However, these changes were not enough to save her. According to Yuhui's parents, on the afternoon of October 26th, after finishing work, their daughter came home as usual and spent some time chatting online with friends. Suddenly, she stopped talking and hurried out. Later, they received a call from her saying she was going to have drinks with friends in Lan Kwai Fong and told them not to worry. Little did they know, the next time they would see their daughter, she would be a lifeless body. Yui's parents were devastated. They provided the police with some clues. Although she had broken up with her German boyfriend, Thomas, in July of that year, Thomas returned to Hong Kong, and the two rekindled their relationship. Even after Thomas went back to Beijing, Yuhui continued to stay in touch with him, occasionally calling each other. She once complained to her parents about the high phone bills, but from her words, it was clear she still had hope for a future with Thomas. Therefore, the possibility that Yuhui had intentionally jumped into the sea could be ruled out. Moreover, when she left home, Yuhui was wearing tight jeans and a loose top. However, when her body was found, the jeans were missing. Typically, a loose top would be more likely to be swept away by the water. Her home was in Kueching. To get from Lan Kwai Fong to Kueching, we would head north. But the sea at Aberdeen, where her body was found, is located south of Lan Kwai Fong, about 6 miles away by car. According to Jenny, Yuhui had an ex-boyfriend named Ifai, who worked as a manager at a convenience store. During the investigation, Ifai stated that he had worked the night shifts on October 25th and 26th. The police confirmed that he was not at home on those nights, which made him a potential suspect. His current girlfriend also revealed that he had been acting strangely, almost like he was losing his mind. The police immediately brought Ifai in for questioning. He admitted that he still had lingering feelings for Yuhui. When they checked his phone records, the police discovered that he had arranged to meet Yuhui on the nights of October 25th and 26th. On the first night, Yuhui did not show up at the meeting spot. The following night, he also didn't see her, so he ended up hanging out with friends until the next morning. Afai's friends confirmed this to the police. After ruling out Afai as a suspect, the police shifted their focus to the victim's German boyfriend, Thomas. As the victim's parents had mentioned, Thomas and Yuhui had broken up once during the 2010 World Cup. After that, Thomas returned to Hong Kong, and they got back together. When the World Cup ended in August, Thomas returned to Beijing for work, leaving Yu Huiyu behind in Hong Kong. Despite this, she continued to miss her German boyfriend deeply, not only spending a lot on long-distance calls, but also saving up to visit him in Beijing. However, on the day of the crime, Thomas was not in Hong Kong, so he could not have been the perpetrator. The police went to Yu Huiyu's home to collect personal items, including her computer. Based on the clues gathered over the next 2 days, the police interviewed nearly 50 people, mostly men, to gather statements. A restaurant worker who had worked with Yu Huiyu, was shocked and saddened to hear of her death. He admitted that while they worked together, he developed feelings for Yu Huiyu and tried to pursue her, but his efforts were unsuccessful. One mentioned that even though he only worked with her for 3 months before leaving, Yu Huiyu's cheerful and friendly personality made her well-liked by everyone at the restaurant. 3 days after the incident, the forensic report was released. The victim had stiff limbs, froth around her mouth, and swollen lungs filled with water, indicating that she was still breathing when submerged. Small blood spots on her eyelids suggested that she had been strangled while still alive. This meant that her heart was still beating when she was thrown into the sea, and she later drowned. The time of death was estimated to be between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., about an hour before the fishermen discovered her. The police deployed a search team along the Aberdeen coastline to look for Yu Huiyu's belongings, but they found nothing. They suspected that Yu Huiyu had been murdered elsewhere, and her body was then dumped into the sea at Aberdeen's waterfront. Among the 50 people interviewed, one man caught the attention of the police. His name was Wen Jiankong, 43 years old, standing 5 feet 10 inches, with a muscular build. He had passed the police academy entrance exam and later became a patrol officer. Everyone thought his life would go smoothly from there, but in his 7th year on the force, he was accused of attempting to assault a colleague's girlfriend. Another source revealed that he was arrested for taking nude photos to blackmail someone. Whatever the reason, Wen Jiankong was dismissed from the force and served 10 months in prison. After his release due to his criminal record, he struggled to find a decent job and was forced to work as a taxi driver. At that time, driving a taxi in Hong Kong was a well-paying job, earning about 10,000 Hong Kong dollars per month, roughly $1,300. However, Wen Jiankong was not content with this. He was fined twice for driving while his license was suspended. To increase his income, Wen Jiankong adapted to the trend of providing ride-hailing services. Yu Huiyu was one of his regular customers. The reason the police suspected Wen Jiankong was because the last call Yu Huiyu made was to him. Between October 26th and 28th, he called and texted Yu Huiyu a total of 4 times. When the police reviewed surveillance footage near the trash dump on Linen Road, they spotted a taxi in the area. After checking the license plate, they confirmed that Wen Jiankong was the driver. The police summoned him for questioning. Wen Jiankong appeared very distraught, crying and saying that he hadn't been able to reach Yu Huiyu for several days and was extremely worried about her. He claimed he never imagined he would never see her again. When the police asked where he was on the night of October 26th, Wen Jiankong stated that he was picking up passengers near Hong Kong. However, this explanation only increased the police's suspicion as Hong Kong and Aberdeen are on opposite sides of a strait, making it entirely possible for Wen Jiankong to have committed the crime. Realizing he had possibly misspoken, Wen Jiankong then claimed that Yu Huiyu had called him that night to tell him not to pick her up. However, this explanation only made him seem more suspicious. As expected, when the police searched Wen Jiankong's taxi, they found blood stains inside the vehicle. Wen Jiankong explained that he transported dozens of passengers every day and suggested that one of them, possibly a woman on her period, might have accidentally left the stain. Additionally, a piece of fabric was found in the trunk, which could have come from the coat Yu Huiyu was wearing. However, since the coat was missing, they couldn't verify this immediately. Further investigation revealed that in early October, Yu Huiyu had gone shopping with a friend had liked a coat, but couldn't find it in her size, so Yu Huiyu ended up buying it herself. The police tracked down the manufacturer of the coat and obtained an identical one for comparison. The fabric fibers on the coat matched those found in the trunk of Wen Jiankong's taxi. DNA testing also confirmed that the blood in the taxi was Yu Huiyu's. Combined with the surveillance footage from the camera near the Li Nan Road trash dump, the police now had enough evidence to arrest Wen Jiankong. 5 days after the crime, the police found Wen Jiankong at a tea house in Kowloon. He was hooded, handcuffed, and escorted to the police station. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, Wen Jiankong could no longer deny his actions. He confessed to the crime and revealed the entire story. It turned out that despite their 18-year age difference, there was a connection between this taxi driver and Yu Huiyu. 1 year earlier, on a night in November 2009, when Jian Kong met Yu Huiyu for the first time. That evening, Yu Huiyu had been out drinking in Lan Kwai Fong and, as usual, took a taxi home. By fate, the taxi driver that night happened to be Wen Jian Kong. Yu Huiyu got into the passenger seat, and because she was dressed quite provocatively, wearing a strong perfume mixed with the scent of alcohol, Wen Jianking couldn't take his eyes off her. Her beautiful appearance and alluring figure captivated him. Yu Huiyu, being an open and friendly person, started chatting with Wen Jianking as soon as she got into the car. She mentioned that she often went out drinking in Lan Kwai Fong at night and almost always needed a taxi to get home in the early morning. Hearing this, Wen Jianking offered to pick her up regularly. To his surprise, Yu Huiyu happily agreed. They exchanged contact information, and over the next 3 months, Wen Jian Kong became Yu Hui's personal driver. They grew closer, and their relationship became more intimate. Initially, Yu Hui half-jokingly asked Wen Jian Kong if he could give her a discount on the taxi fare. Unexpectedly, he agreed immediately. By February 2010, they were no longer just a driver and a passenger, but a couple dating. Wen Jian Kong admitted that he had fallen in love with Yu Hui at first sight. He started driving her to work for free, paying for their meals whenever they went out, and occasionally buying her gifts. Even though he wasn't financially well off, Wen Jianking was willing to spend money on Yu Hui out of love. When he ran out of money, he borrowed from friends. Coincidentally, Yu Hui met her German boyfriend, Thomas, in February as well. From that point on, she began maintaining relationships with both men. Wen Jianking was aware that Yu Hui had a boyfriend. He understood that he was just a taxi driver, with limited financial resources and a narrow social circle, nowhere near as well off as her official boyfriend. Despite this, he still hoped that she would choose him. By July of that year, during the World Cup, Yu Hui borrowed 10,000 Hong Kong dollars from Wen Jian Kong to buy household items, seizing the opportunity when Jian Kong suggested that they have a weekly heart-to-heart talk. To his surprise, Yu Hui agreed. Overjoyed, he immediately transferred the money to her bank account. Their relationship grew increasingly intimate. From then on, they would meet each week at secluded spots like in Repulse Bay for their secret encounters. They even created a code-name mailbox to refer to their meetings in the car. After each encounter, Ye would typically receive 500 or 1,000 Hong Kong dollars from Wen Jian Kong. This ambiguous, undefined relationship continued for 3 months. During this time, Yu Hui frequently asked Wen Jian Kong for money, citing various reasons. Wen Jian Kong became more deeply entangled in this affair, pouring more and more money into Yu Hui, even believing that she might eventually leave her German boyfriend for him. However, in reality, Yu Hui was quietly saving up this money to prepare for her future life in Germany. As time passed, on October 26th, Yu Hui once again invited Wen Jian Kong for an encounter. That evening, after picking her up from Lan Kwai Fong, Wen Jian Kong drove to the entrance of a cemetery near Tai Tsingqiao village. The place was deserted and quiet. There was no one else around. They were pleased with the location and began their usual activities. Unexpectedly, in this remote area, there were occasional passers-by. Suddenly, a car approached, startling them. They quickly stopped what they were doing and sat talking in the car. They hadn't even put their clothes back on when Yu Hui mentioned that her boyfriend, Thomas, would be returning to Hong Kong on November 1st. She smiled excitedly, talking about her bright future with Thomas, completely oblivious to Wen Jian Kong's feelings. At this point, already frustrated by the car that interrupted them, and now hearing that Yu Hui was planning to leave Hong Kong, Wen Jian Kong felt extremely irritated and uneasy. However, the worst was yet to come. Yu Hui's next statement pushed him over the edge. She said, "This will be the last time we're together." To avoid being caught cheating by her boyfriend, she needed to end her relationship with Wen Jian Kong. However, she still had some debt at the bank and didn't want Thomas to find out about it, so she asked Wen Jian Kong to lend her an additional 10,000 Hong Kong dollars as a breakup fee. Upon hearing this, Wen Jian Kong angrily responded, "I've treated you so well. I'm deep in debt because of you, and this is how you repay me." The two argued fiercely in the car, and the confrontation quickly escalated. Taking advantage of the fact that they were both undressed, Yu Hui elbowed Wen Jian Kong hard in the groin. Struck in a sensitive area, Wen Jian Kong was in pain, furious, and began losing control.
He flew into a rage, assaulted her, and then used both hands to strangle Yu Huiyu for 2 minutes until she lost consciousness. Panicked, Wen Jiankong believed he had killed her, but in reality, Yu Huiyu was still alive at that moment. In his frantic state, he threw her underwear, jeans, and blue canvas shoes into the roadside bushes, then carried her body to the trunk of his car and drove to the seaside near the trash dump on Linen Road in Aberdeen. Around 9 p.m. he arrived, but had to wait because there were many people fishing and filming in the area. It wasn't until 2:30 a.m., when the place was deserted, that he finally dumped Yu Huiyu's body into the sea. What's noteworthy is that if this timeline is accurate, Yu Huiyu regained consciousness after being thrown into the sea and struggled for several hours. After committing the crime, Wen Jiankong used his experience as a former patrol officer to mislead the investigation. He repeatedly called and texted Yu Huiyu, asking where she was, in an attempt to create an alibi. According to the crime scene reconstruction after Wen Jiankong's arrest, he walked along a trail to the pier, where he threw Yu Huiyu's body and her light blue handbag into the sea. The disposal site was only about 100 meters from where the victim's clothes were found. The police were puzzled because the trash dump on Linen Road, Aberdeen, and the cemetery near Taken Kiao village were 27 kilometers apart, taking nearly 40 minutes to drive between. So why didn't Wen Jiankong dispose of the body at the cemetery and instead drive to such a distant location? Wen Jiankong explained that he was in a state of panic and his mind was blank at the time. Having served as a patrol officer stationed at the Hong Kong Marine Police headquarters, he was quite familiar with the area. Additionally, he knew the procedures and methods the Marine Police would use to handle such cases, and could even gather information from former colleagues, which led him to drive to this location. On November 2nd, under Wen Jiankong's guidance, the police arrived at the disposal site. Sure enough, they found Yu Huiyu's clothes in the bushes. It then took the police an additional 3 hours to reconstruct the crime scene. Yu Huiyu's parents were utterly shocked when they learned that the suspect had been arrested. They pointed at Wen Jiankong and said, "Isn't that the man from the other day?" It turned out that on the second day after the crime, Wen Jiankong had proactively called Yu Huiyu's parents, introducing himself as a taxi driver and also a friend of Yu Huiyu, saying that he was looking for her. He even went as far as driving Yu Huiyu's parents to the morgue to identify their daughter's body. Yu Huiyu's parents were deeply moved, thinking there was someone who cared about their daughter. In an interview with reporters, they expressed how terrified they felt when they realized they had been sitting in the car of the man who murdered their daughter. In the hearts of Yu Huiyu's parents, their daughter was a dutiful and caring child who had never given them any reason to worry. She always took care of her younger siblings without needing to be asked. The pain of losing her was overwhelming, and they could not find solace in their grief. Yu Huiyu's younger sister wept silently as she packed away her sister's belongings. On November 3rd, the Hong Kong Public Prosecutor's Office formally charged Wen Jiankong. The date coincided with Yu Huiyu's burial. 6 months after the incident, in April 2012, Wen Jiankong's trial took place at the Hong Kong East Magistrates Court. He was charged with murder. During the trial, Wen Jiankong learned that Yu Huiyu was still alive when he threw her into the sea. He expressed remorse and cried out in court, stating that it was the greatest regret of his life. However, Wen Jiankong did not plead guilty to murder, only to manslaughter. The prosecutor argued that Wen Jiankong was not acting out of sudden anger, but was fully aware that Yu Huiyu was still alive when he threw her into the sea. Wen Jiankong vehemently denied this, insisting that he believed Yu Huiyu was already dead, which is why he disposed of her body in the sea. He claimed that if he had known she was still breathing, he would never have done it. Wen Jiankong's lawyer argued that he had lent money to Yu Huiyu multiple times, and that they had numerous financial transactions between them. Even though Yu Huiyu had a boyfriend, she continued to maintain an ambiguous relationship with Wen Jiankong, making her partly responsible for what happened. However, only Wen Jiankong and Yu Huiyu knew what truly occurred that night, and now that Yu Huiyu was dead, Wen Jiankong's testimony could not be fully verified. After 8 days of trial, the jury unanimously found Wen Jiankong guilty of murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment. Wen Jiankong's fate was sealed. After nearly 3 years, he finally had to pay for his heinous crime. The rest of Wen Jiankong's life will be spent behind bars. However, not many people believed Wen Jiankong's testimony. Aside from the fact that Yu Huiyu could no longer testify, Wen Jiankong's previous reputation also cast doubt on his claims. His prior dismissal from the police force for misconduct including attempts to exploit or blackmail with explicit photos, left him widely despised. After murdering Yuhueyu, he feigned concern by calling her parents, while simultaneously disposing of her body and attempting to fabricate an alibi. Such actions painted him as deceitful and ruthless. There were even rumors that when Jinkong frequently picked up passengers in the Lan Kuaifang area, exploiting intoxicated women by taking them home and assaulting them, when Jinkong was far from the innocent person he claimed to be. In this case, it took less than a week from the discovery of the body to the capture of the suspect. The swift and effective investigation by the Hong Kong police was widely acknowledged by the public. Later, the senior inspector in charge of the investigation stated that the court's verdict accurately reflected the truth and the police's efforts. He believed that anyone could see that when Jean Kong's testimony and evidence lacked credibility. The Yuhuiyu case has come to a close, leaving her family in deep sorrow, and serving as a sobering lesson for everyone. When Jian Kong must now pay for his crime behind the bars of a prison, facing the torment of his conscience every day. As for Yuhuiyu, the young woman with dreams of a better life, she tragically lost her life due to her own mistakes. Perhaps if Yuhuiyu had been content with her life, appreciated the genuine love of those around her, and resisted the temptations of wealth and status, this tragedy could have been avoided. This story also serves as a warning to young women who are enamored with materialism, willing to compromise themselves for a life of luxury. True happiness doesn't come from wealth or fame, but from sincere love and wise choices. The Yuhuiyu case is like an indelible scar, leaving behind pain and a valuable lesson for all of us. Story 3. What could be more heartbreaking than witnessing your loved ones die one by one due to illness or accidents? But perhaps it is even more heart-wrenching and enraging when they are murdered for no apparent reason. The perpetrator uses such cunning tactics and hides so well. The pain is magnified when facing the fact that the murderer is still at large. In this context, the anger and desire for justice become the sole motivation for the victim's family to continue fighting. They not only seek answers, but also want the perpetrator to pay for their crimes, for justice to be served, and for the departed to rest in peace. Every clue, every piece of evidence, no matter how small, becomes a fragile hope in this arduous journey. However, the situation is not that simple. Today's case is the tragedy of a family where 3 people were murdered in one night, leaving a man to witness the loss of his wife and 2 young daughters in a state of fury. Was the perpetrator someone with a deep grudge against this family? Or were they simply a thief? Some even believe the killer might be a psychopath who took the lives of a mother and her 2 children just to make a mark. The truth behind these deaths awaits your discovery. On April 20th, 2006, a heartbreaking murder case occurred in Linggao County, Hainan Province, China. A mother and her 2 children died of asphyxiation. The incident was discovered by Zhang Zhehan, 35, the husband and father of the victims, at 6 a.m. when he returned home after a night shift. Upon entering the house, Zhang Zhehan sensed something was wrong. The house was eerily silent, with no sounds coming from the kitchen or living room. He called out to his wife and children, but received no response. His heart raced, filled with a sense of dread. Zhang Zhehan quickly ran to the bedroom. The scene that greeted him was shocking. His wife lay motionless on the bed, her face pale and lifeless. His 2 young daughters were also there, motionless and cold. Zhang Zhehan felt his world collapse, unable to believe his eyes. He rushed to the bed, shaking his wife and children, trying to wake them, but all efforts were in vain. He called the police in a panic, his voice trembling and broken. Upon receiving Zhang Zhehan's call, the police quickly arrived at the victim's house. The main bedroom where the crime occurred was filled with the smell of diethyl ether. Ether, used as an anesthetic, has a distinctive odor. This smell can linger on the victims' mouths and noses after exposure. It's easily recognizable, similar to the smell of alcohol or other volatile liquids. Sensitive individuals like the police can easily detect it. If the victims were anesthetized with ether, the smell would likely remain on their bodies, especially around the mouth and nose. On the bed, the wife's body lay with a swollen face. Bruises appeared, her lips turned dark purple, her eyes wide open, and dried blood marked her mouth and nose. Red marks on her neck suggested the murderer's hand, or the edge of a pillow pressing against her face. Her hands were clenched, indicating a desperate struggle before losing consciousness. Beside the body, the pillow had blood stains and clear handprints, indicating a fierce struggle. The strong smell of ether lingered in the air, hinting that the victim was anesthetized before being killed. The body lay in a rigid position, one arm twisted under her, showcasing her helplessness in the final moments. The pillow beside the wife's body had blood and handprints. The blood stains weren't just on the surface, but soaked into the fabric, showing significant force was used. The pillow's edges had small tears and rough patches with indents, especially in the middle. Strands of the victim's hair were caught in the pillow. Police found small fabric fibers from the pillow on the victim's face and neck, indicating it was used to smother her. This pillow, an otherwise harmless household item, became a murder weapon in the hands of the killer. In the same room, the elder daughter's body lay on the floor, eyes wide open. Marks on her face and neck indicated a fierce struggle. Her body also showed bruises, signs of being restrained and killed. The younger daughter was found nearby. Her body lay curled up on the floor, surrounded by blood stains and chaotic footprints. Bruises on her neck and face indicated she too was brutally killed. The autopsy results of all three victims showed that the cause of death was asphyxiation. On the wife's body, traces of ether were found around her nose and mouth, confirming that she was anesthetized before being killed. The older daughter had evidence of being smothered by hand, along with bruises and mechanical injuries around her neck. The youngest daughter's body showed similar injuries, with signs of asphyxiation and bruising, especially around her neck and face. Additionally, the pillow contained DNA from all three victims. The examination also revealed that all three were killed within a short time frame, indicating that the perpetrator acted decisively and gave the victims no chance to call for help or escape. Based on the evidence collected, it can be inferred that the killer approached the victims while they were in a deep sleep. He used a cloth soaked in ether to cover the victim's nose, causing her to temporarily lose consciousness. He then used a pillow to press down on her face, leading to asphyxiation. The pillow was pressed down with great force, as shown by the deep imprints and blood stains soaked into the fabric. The handprints on the pillow indicated that the killer used both hands to apply pressure, ensuring the victim could not breathe. However, the perpetrator did not leave his own fingerprints on the pillow. Using a pillow allowed the killer to murder quickly and effectively, while also muffling the victim's cries for help, preventing nearby people from noticing. This was a calculated and ruthless act, showcasing the perpetrator's determination and cold-blooded nature. The use of ether for anesthesia also showed that the killer was well prepared. The murder of all three victims in a short time, and in such a brutal manner, suggests that the perpetrator not only had a strong motive, but also the ability to control the situation without succumbing to psychological pressure. The killer had a clear plan and acted decisively, leaving no chance for any victim to survive. The signs of violence and struggle on the victims' bodies, particularly the pillow marks and bruises, indicate that the victims fought back fiercely. The killer used physical strength to overpower them, suggesting he might have been physically superior or had an advantage over the victims. Police have also deduced that the killer likely had a familiar relationship with the family and may have been inside the house before, knowing the layout and the locations of each room and person. This familiarity helped him carry out the crime efficiently without wasting time searching for the victims. The perpetrator could be someone known to the family, someone who had been in the house before and was aware of the family's routines. The first person on the scene was Zhang Zihong. He stated that the main door was open when he arrived home, but all locks and hinges were intact, indicating that the perpetrator did not force entry and might have been let in by the victims. The bedroom window, according to Zhang Zihong, was always left open at night for ventilation without much caution. This raised suspicions as the police found muddy footprints leading into the house around the window. However, these prints were only visible under a microscope, implying that the killer might have tried to erase them if he entered this way. Therefore, the killer could have entered through either the main door or the window, complicating the task of narrowing down suspects. The police first collected information about the three victims from the surviving family member, neighbors, and relatives. The first victim, Zheng Mingyu, 33, was a primary school teacher. She was known as a gentle woman dedicated to her work and family. Her colleagues and students admired her for her kindness and enthusiasm. She was actively involved in volunteering and community activities, building a respected image as a mother and teacher. Zheng Mingyu had good relationships with her colleagues and friends, showing no signs of serious conflicts. She also had a harmonious relationship with her husband, Zhang Zihong. Despite their busy work schedules, they always made time for family, sharing their daily lives and challenges. Neighbors often saw them taking short trips together to strengthen their bond and create beautiful memories with their children. The second victim was their eldest daughter, Zhang Jian, 12, a sixth grader. Zhang Jian was a smart, energetic girl with excellent academic performance. She participated in extracurricular activities like singing, dancing, and sports. At home, she was a model big sister, helping her parents care for and play with her younger sister. The youngest victim, Zhang Yizhao, 8, was a second grader. According to Zhang Zihong, Zhang Yizhao was a shy but adorable girl. She loved drawing and had a talent for art. She had won first place in several children's drawing competitions in the city. Zhang Yizhao was always polite and obedient, respecting her elders. Despite her young age, she knew how to share and care for those around her. The initial reaction of the police to the case was one of sorrow and regret, as it seemed to be a perfect and happy family. Zhang Mingyue, a kind and dedicated wife, was beloved and respected by her colleagues and students. Her two daughters, Zhang Jian and Zhang Yizhao, were well-behaved, intelligent, and talented. The family's relationships appeared to be harmonious. Both the police and the surrounding community found it hard to imagine such a tragedy befalling a model family like this. There were no clear signs of internal conflict or any motive for such a crime within the family, posing a significant challenge to the investigation. The police suspected it might be a facade of a happy family they tried to maintain, but this possibility seemed low. This led the police to expand their investigation, considering every possibility from external relationships and hidden conflicts that they might have kept secret. Did anyone have a grudge against this family in the past or present? To clarify this, the police needed to investigate all relationships and activities of the victims, not only within the family, but also in their work environment and social activities. The police ruled out robbery as a motive, as Zhang Zihong confirmed that all valuable items and money in the house remained untouched. Therefore, the police focused on the relationships and conflicts involving the victims and the family with those around them, along with the suspicion that the perpetrator might be someone familiar with the family. On April 21st, the police compiled a list of suspects. The prime suspect was Mr. Li, 35. He was a close friend of Zhang Zihong and frequently visited the Zhang household. He had witnessed many arguments between Zhang Zihong and his wife. Moreover, Mr. Li often sided with Zhang Zihong. Notably, Mr. Li had a close relationship with Zhang Mingyue before she met Zhang Zihong, raising suspicions about the real dynamics among the three. Additionally, Mr. Li had a history of domestic violence and had been sued by his wife's family. In 2003, Zhang Zihong did not install cameras, but there was street surveillance that could show who entered and exited the Zhang house. The police requested footage and found that at 9 p.m. on April 20th, a man with a build similar to Mr. Li was seen loitering outside Zhang Zihong's house. Additionally, a hair sample found at the crime scene matched Mr. Li's DNA, despite his denial of being at the Zhang house on the night of the murder. Initially, the evidence pointed to Mr. Li's involvement. However, during interrogation, he continually asserted his innocence. Mr. Li claimed that on the night of the murder, he was at home and did not leave all evening, with his wife as his alibi. He insisted he had no reason to harm his friend's family, and that the arguments between Zhang Zihong and his wife were minor and not worth resorting to violence. He explained that his hair was at the scene because he often visited Zhang Zihong's house, and it could have fallen during previous visits. Regarding the surveillance footage, Mr. Li asserted that it was not him, possibly a mistake or someone with a similar build. He emphasized that despite his past with domestic violence over 3 years ago, he had made efforts to change and live a normal, non-violent life. Upon closer examination of the surveillance footage, the police realized that the man was not Mr. Li, but a neighbor with a similar build. This neighbor confirmed that he often walked around the neighborhood at night due to insomnia, a fact well known among the local residents. The hair sample initially matched with Mr. Li's DNA was re-examined. Upon closer inspection, the police discovered that the hair was not new, but likely shed during Mr. Li's previous visits to the house, making its presence at the scene unsurprising. With this information, the police concluded that Mr. Li was innocent, and the initial evidence was either coincidental or an attempt by someone to frame him. However, during Mr. Li's interrogation, the police learned about another potential suspect, Mrs. Wang, 40, a neighbor who had personal conflicts with Zheng Mingyu over land disputes. Mrs. Wang was the only one who reported seeing a strange man entering and leaving the Zhong house on the night of the murder. However, her statement had several inconsistencies. The police also found incriminating evidence against Mrs. Wong. A piece of the ether-soaked cloth was discovered in her trash, and blood from one of the children was found on her window. When questioned, Mrs. Wong couldn't explain how these items ended up there. She had a history of mental illness and had previously exhibited violent behavior. To uncover the truth, the police decided to interrogate Mrs. Wong more thoroughly. During the interrogation, Mrs. Wong appeared confused and couldn't provide a coherent explanation for the evidence. She admitted to having personal conflicts with Zheng Mingyu over land, but insisted this was not a motive for her to act violently. An important detail uncovered was Mrs. Wong's treatment for mental illness at a local hospital. Her medical records indicated she had paranoid tendencies and might imagine scenarios that didn't exist. Doctors explained this could account for her inconsistent statements about seeing a strange man at the Zhong house. However, the ether-soaked cloth and blood on her window were undeniable pieces of evidence. Despite her mental instability, these findings seemed to implicate her. The police suspected that her illness might have led to uncontrolled actions. However, some officers believed the real culprit might be using her mental state and history to set her up. Ultimately, the police couldn't conclusively determine Mrs. Wong's guilt due to conflicting opinions. They continued to investigate other suspects and search for new leads to identify the true perpetrator or find more concrete evidence against Mrs. Wong. Meanwhile, they placed Mrs. Wong under special surveillance to ensure she didn't pose further danger and provided her with psychological support as needed. The final suspect on the list was the Zhong family's former housekeeper, Mrs. Liu, 35. She had worked for the Zhong family and was trusted by them. However, she was abruptly fired for unclear reasons. Rumors quickly spread that she had a romantic relationship with Zhang Zhehan, leading to her dismissal by Zhang Minghui. Mrs. Liu expressed anger and a sense of injustice to her friends after being fired. She felt wronged and didn't deserve such treatment. The conflict didn't end with her dismissal. Mrs. Liu felt humiliated by gossip and judgment from neighbors. Moreover, her animosity towards Zhong Mingyue deepened when Zhong refused to pay her remaining wages and bonuses. This financial strain forced Mrs. Liu to borrow money to meet daily needs, adding to her psychological and financial pressure, possibly leading to negative behavior and thoughts. Although these conflicts didn't seem severe enough to drive someone to murder, an old phone belonging to Mrs. Liu was found at the scene. It contained numerous threatening messages from Zhong Zhehan's wife. Additionally, the police discovered an unexplained deposit in Mrs. Liu's bank account shortly after the murder. However, thorough investigation revealed her innocence. The old phone with threatening messages found near the scene had been stolen from Mrs. Liu weeks earlier, which she didn't report, considering it a minor loss. This was confirmed when police matched the phone's disappearance with the timing of the threatening messages, indicating someone else used her phone to send them. After thoroughly examining the network records, the police discovered that the threatening messages sent to Zhang Mingyue were sent from various locations that did not match Mrs. Liu's whereabouts at those times. Mrs. Liu also provided evidence showing she was at different places when the messages were sent, including receipts and witness statements confirming her presence at locations far from the Zhang household. Furthermore, when comparing the timeline of the phone's loss with the messages, the police realized that the first threatening messages only appeared after Mrs. Liu had informed friends and family about losing her phone. The large, unusual sum of money in Mrs. Liu's bank account was also investigated. The police found that this money came from a bank loan Mrs. Liu had applied for before the murder to cover living expenses and debt. The related documents, including the loan agreement and payment receipts, were verified by the bank, ruling out any connection to the murder. After analyzing all the evidence, the police concluded that Mrs. Liu had neither the motive nor the opportunity to commit the crime. While there were conflicts between her and the Zhang family, they were not enough to make her a ruthless murderer. The truth about the threatening messages on Mrs. Liu's phone partially proved her innocence and indicated that the real culprit was still at large. The perpetrator might have been using Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Wong as scapegoats. After being exonerated, Mrs. Liu agreed to cooperate with the police and provide a detailed testimony about what she knew. In her statement, Mrs. Liu recounted suspicious events involving Zhang Zihong, who the police had initially ruled out because he had an alibi, confirmed by coworkers that he was at work the night of the murders and returned home in the morning. Mrs. Liu recalled witnessing several intense arguments between Zhang Zihong and his wife before she was fired. Their relationship was complicated. While they appeared harmonious outwardly, those close to them knew there were underlying tensions. Zhang Zihong was a quiet, reserved man who was often absent due to work. However, during his rare moments at home, he often argued with Zhang Mingyue about parenting and important family decisions. Despite this, Zhang Mingyue tried to maintain stability and harmony in the family for the sake of their daughters, who often witnessed their parents' arguments. On the surface, the Zhang family seemed normal and happy. However, deeper investigation revealed unusual signs in their relationships. This information became crucial in the police's effort to uncover the truth behind Zhang Mingyue and her daughter's deaths. They began to delve deeper into Zhang Zihong and his recent activities. A significant event occurred the day before the murders. Zhang Zihong's co-worker, Mrs. Mu, happened to see him near Mrs. Lu's neighborhood. Her house was on a route she frequently traveled, so she noticed him but didn't find it suspicious at the time. Only after hearing about the police investigating Mrs. Lu did Mrs. Mu remember the sighting, hoping it might aid the case. The police scrutinized security cameras around Mrs. Lu's neighborhood and found footage of Zhang Zihong lingering near her house on the night she reported her phone missing. This raised strong suspicion that Zhang Zihong might have stolen Mrs. Lu's phone to execute his plan. Continuing the investigation, the police collected network records showing that the threatening messages to Zhang Mingyue were sent from locations near Zhang Zihong's workplace, further implicating him as the one using Mrs. Lu's phone. On April 25th, Zhang Zihong was summoned to the police station to confront the new evidence. During interrogation, he vehemently denied all accusations, maintaining his innocence and claiming no involvement in the murders. He explained his presence near Mrs. Lu's house as a coincidence, citing a personal errand in the area unrelated to stealing her phone or sending threatening messages. However, when presented with network records showing the messages were sent from near his workplace, Zhang Zihong had no plausible defense. Additionally, police had investigated his alibi, discovering that his co-worker, who confirmed his presence at the company the night of the murders, had been bribed to provide false testimony. In reality, Zhang Zihong left the company around 10 p.m. and returned around 4 a.m. Finally, after cross-referencing all evidence and gathered information, the police concluded that Zhang Zihong orchestrated the entire crime. He meticulously planned the murders, created a false alibi, and framed Mrs. Lu by stealing her phone to send threatening messages to Zhang Mingyue, deceiving the police. At the police station, Zhang Zihong confessed the whole truth. To live openly with his mistress, this unfaithful husband ruthlessly murdered his wife and 2 daughters. The motive for the crime stemmed from his extramarital relationship with a woman named Su 29. About 3 years before the crime, Zhang Zihong and Mrs. Su were merely colleagues. However, over time, they became attracted to each other, and their relationship gradually developed into a romantic one. During this period, Zhang Zihong's relationship with Zhang Mingyue had significantly deteriorated. They constantly argued about financial issues, parenting, and other important family decisions. This discord left Zhang Zihong feeling exhausted and hopeless. This was one reason he turned to an affair, as Mrs. Su was an attractive, intelligent woman who knew how to make an impression. This drew in Zhang Zihong, who was feeling trapped and unhappy in his marriage. Their relationship deepened, and eventually, they had a child together. This made them realize they wanted to be together officially and legally. However, they understood that Zhang Mingyue and the 2 daughters were major obstacles to their plan. Divorce was not a viable option, as the couple owned considerable assets, including properties and savings accounts. Zhang Zihong realized that if they divorced, Zhang Mingyue would receive most of the assets according to the law. Therefore, Mrs. Su did not hesitate to encourage Zhang Zihong to murder Zhang Mingyue, so they could be together without any hindrance. About 3 months before the murder, after multiple discussions and planning, Zhang Zihong and Mrs. Su decided to execute a brutal plan to eliminate Zhang Mingyue. They considered various methods and finally chose to stage the murder to look like it was committed by someone else, specifically targeting Mrs. Wang and Mrs. Lu, who had previous conflicts with Zhang Mingyue, to mislead the police investigation. Zhang Zihong and Mrs. Su planned meticulously and in detail. They decided on a night when Zhang Zihong could create an alibi by staying late at work and returning home early in the morning with colleagues as witnesses. During this time, Zhang Zihong would sneak out and commit the crime. Before that, he thoroughly studied the area around his house. learning the routes and security weaknesses. He discovered that the entire area had only one camera that could see the front gate of his house, allowing him to enter the house through another route to avoid the camera. Zhang Zihong purchased the necessary tools such as ropes, gloves, and other equipment. As the police investigation confirmed, it was Zhang Zihong who snuck into Mrs. Lu's house when she was away and quickly stole her phone. He then sent threatening messages to Zheng Mingyue the day before the murder, that she would be caught off guard. On April 19, 2006, Zhang Zihong decided to carry out his heinous act. To execute the plan, he used a rope to climb into his house late at night when his wife and daughters were asleep. In the darkness, he quietly approached his wife's bedroom. Zhang Zihong had prepared an ether-soaked cloth, a strong anesthetic, to use on his wife. As he got close to the bed, Zhang Zihong carefully placed the ether-soaked cloth over his wife's nose and mouth, causing her to lose consciousness immediately. He then used a pillow to suffocate her until she died from asphyxiation. While doing this, his 12-year-old woke up and saw the horrific scene. In a panic, Zhang Zihong turned his attention to her. He used the same method, applying the ether-soaked cloth to knock her unconscious before using the pillow to suffocate her. The cries and noises from the struggle woke up his 8-year-old daughter. She cried and panicked at what she saw. To silence her, Zhang Zihong killed her as well. He repeated the same cruel method, anesthetizing her with the ether-soaked cloth before suffocating her with the pillow. During the entire crime, Zhang Zihong called Mrs. to report what was happening, proving his commitment to their plan. Zhang Zihong's ruthless actions were driven not only by Mrs. Su's instigation, but also by his own greed and lack of conscience. After killing his wife and daughters, Zhang Zihong immediately executed the next part of his plan to mislead the police investigation and frame others. First, he took the ether-soaked cloth used to anesthetize Zheng Mingyue and his daughters and discarded it in Mrs. Wang's trash can. He believed this would make the police suspect Mrs. Wang's involvement in the crime. Next, Zhang Zihong carefully took a piece of cloth and soaked it in Zheng Mingyue's blood. He then went near Mrs. Wang's window and smeared the blood on it to further implicate her. Additionally, he brought along Mrs. Lu's stolen cell phone. He placed it near Mrs. Wang's house to create false evidence, making the police believe that Mrs. Lu and Mrs. Wang were closely connected to the crime. This was also to ensure both Mrs. Lu and Mrs. Wang became police suspects, allowing Zhang Zhihan to escape suspicion. Zhang Zhihan executed these actions meticulously, hoping the police would be deceived by the fabricated evidence and not investigate him. However, his efforts ultimately failed, as the police persistently investigated and found inconsistencies in the evidence and testimonies leading to Zhang Zhihan's arrest and confession. When interrogated by the police, Mrs. Su admitted that she was almost fully aware of the entire incident through phone calls. Mrs. Su testified that on the night of the murders, she received a call from Zhang Zhihan. During the call, Zhang Zhihan described in detail what he was doing, from climbing into the house with a rope to approaching his wife and 2 daughters. At that moment, Mrs. Su stated that she felt regretful and truly terrified. She tried to stop Zhang Zhihan upon realizing he was about to kill Zheng Mingyue, but to no avail. She continuously pleaded with Zhang Zhihan to stop, especially when he talked about killing the 2 children. However, her pleas could not change Zhang Zhihan's mind. In a state of frenzy driven by greed and rage, Zhang Zhihan proceeded with his heinous actions. He completely ignored Mrs. Su's begging and went on to murder his 2 daughters. Mrs. Su admitted that while she did not directly participate in the murders, she felt guilty for planning the murders with Zhang Zhihan and regretted it only when it was too late. Her testimony helped the police better understand Zhang Zhihan's motives and criminal process. The police realized that although Mrs. Su did not directly take part in the murders, she knew about the plan in advance and did not report it. Moreover, she had incited Zhang Zhihan. This made her legally responsible as well. Her statements not only confirmed Zhang Zhihan's crimes, but also shed light on the brutality and inhumanity of his actions in this horrific murder case. On May 1st, the Supreme Court sentenced Zhang Zhihan to death on 3 counts of murder and Mrs. Su to 15 years in prison for being an accessory to murder. This gruesome murder case not only left an unending pain for the victims' loved ones, but also served as a stark reminder of the dangers of greed, selfishness, and irresponsibility within a family. This case shows that love and happiness in a family cannot be built on deceit and betrayal. Zhang Zhihan's extramarital affair and immoral actions led to a heartbreaking tragedy, resulting in the loss of 3 innocent lives, including 2 young children. The lesson from this case highlights the importance of honesty and responsibility in family relationships. Each individual must be mindful of their actions, carefully consider their decisions, and cherish the happiness of their loved ones. Additionally, the case underscores the need for education and the installation of ethical values in younger generations, helping them understand the consequences of wrongful actions. Finally, we must raise awareness and maintain a determined stance against criminal acts to protect justice and bring peace to the community. Story 4. In our daily lives, sometimes we have to swallow our pride and endure hardships just to survive in a tough work environment. However, this endurance can sometimes lead to immense risks, pushing our lives into the depths of crime. Today's case is a clear and vivid example of the silent crimes that occur in the workplace. Chongquan is a district in Nantong, Jiangsu Province, China, known for its picturesque and prosperous scenery, making it a thriving tourist destination. Consequently, the tourism industry, including businesses and tour guides, is highly developed here. Chongquan is also a popular tourist spot, attracting many visitors. Everything was flourishing until early 2003, when a shocking crime shattered the peace of this area. At 8:15 p.m. on April 6, 2003, a tourist named Su Mingyue was walking her dog in a park when her started barking loudly at an empty lot. Su Mingyue looked around and saw a sign indicating that the lot belonged to Chaohua, a well-known tourism company in Chongquan. Recently, Chaohua had been expanding into the restaurant and hotel business. This centrally located lot, with convenient transportation access, was intended for the construction of a large hotel by Chaohua. As a tourist, Su Mingyue didn't know much about this. Seeing that the lot was owned and fenced, decided not to go inside to avoid trouble. Unexpectedly, her dog broke free from its leash, slipped through a gap, and ran straight into the lot. Su Mingyue tried calling her dog back, but it didn't return. She had no choice but to contact the security guard of the lot to get inside and find her dog. However, after searching the entire lot, Su Mingyue couldn't find any security guards, nor any contact numbers. Just as she was at a loss, her dog returned with a blood-stained piece of cloth in its mouth. Alarmed, Su Mingyue immediately called the police, suspecting a human corpse in the lot. The Chongquan District Police arrived quickly and attempted to contact Chaohua, but received no response until about 9:40 p.m. After confirming the situation, Chaohua sent someone to open the gate for the police to investigate. The lot was filled with scattered construction materials. Following Su Mingyue's dog to a deeper area, the dog started digging and barking loudly. Soon, a piece of brown fabric was exposed. The Chongquan police immediately called for backup and reported the severity of the situation to higher authorities. With approval, they began excavation. The victim's body was found face down, buried in a pit about 1.5 meters deep, half a meter wide, and 2 meters long. Recent heavy rains had turned the soil to mud, making retrieval difficult. It took over half an hour to carefully extract the intact body. The victim was wrapped in a white plastic sheet, which had torn during transportation, revealing the upper body. Initial examination couldn't determine the cause or time of death, requiring forensic analysis for accurate results. Back at the station, forensic examination commenced. The first step was to clean the body thoroughly to avoid misjudgment. After over 12 hours of continuous work, the forensic team provided preliminary findings. The victim was a male, aged 45 to 48, who died between 9 p.m. and midnight on April 2003 from excessive blood loss. The body had numerous wounds, none fatal individually, but collectively contributing to death. The victim's face was heavily slashed, and his genitals were cut off and stuffed in his mouth. Post-mortem, the assailant stabbed the victim in the heart, puncturing it and severing multiple nerves. The hands and feet showed signs of severe binding, and all fingers were completely fractured. The brutality suggested a deep-seated grudge. The crime scene lacked signs of struggle or blood, indicating it was merely a disposal site, not the murder scene. The lot, enclosed by a 1.5-meter fence, was private property of Chaohua, inaccessible to outsiders, suggesting the perpetrator was someone within Chaohua, likely with access to the lot's key. After the news broke, many people started to talk about it. Since the victim did not have any identification on him, the police could only investigate based on recent missing person reports. Among those who had reported someone missing, one individual caught the police's attention, Song Yan. The daughter of Song Dingyuan, the director of Chahua Company, and the owner of the lot where the body was found. The police immediately contacted Song Yin. When she arrived, she was accompanied by her mother, Shirong. Both women had striking appearances and strong demeanors, but their faces showed clear signs of exhaustion. As soon as they arrived, Song Yin asked the police about the unidentified body. The police took her and Mrs. Shirong inside to identify if the body was indeed Song Dingyuan. Upon seeing the body, Song Yin couldn't hold back and ran outside to vomit. Only Mrs. Shirong managed to stay composed and examine the sole of the victim's foot. Upon confirming that the body had a large blue birthmark on the sole, she collapsed and fainted. It took a while for Mrs. Shirong to regain consciousness. Meanwhile, the police took the victim's daughter's statement. Song Yen recounted that on the morning of April 2nd, 2003, her father, Song Dingyuan, left the house for a business meeting. That day was also Song Yan's birthday. Every year the whole family would gather to celebrate, and Mr. Song had promised to come home early. Around 6 p.m. on April 2nd, Song Yen called her father to ask him to buy some items. However, his phone was turned off. She thought he was still busy with work, so she and her mother waited until late at night, but he never came back and his phone remained unreachable. Song Yen tried looking for him at his office, but his secretary said he hadn't been to the office that day. She also contacted the business partner her father was supposed to meet, only to learn that they had signed the contract 2 days earlier. At this point, Song Yen could no longer stay calm. She reported her father missing to the police and organized a search, but found nothing. On the afternoon of April 3rd, Mr. Song's car was found in a suburban area more than 30 kilometers southwest of the city center. This was a newly developed area that Chahua Company had purchased at a high price for a resort project. It wasn't unusual for his car to be there, but when Song Yen checked, she discovered the memory card from the car's dash cam was missing. With no residents nearby, there were no additional clues. Since then, Song Yen and her mother had been tirelessly searching, but to no avail. They always hoped Mr. Song would return. But now, seeing his cold, lifeless body devastated them. Song Yen also mentioned that her father was a kind and gentle man who treated everyone with respect. Even when subordinates made mistakes, he never punished them harshly, at most deducting some salary from the previous month. As for his family, he was a loving husband and father, always caring for them. Despite being a successful and wealthy man, he never had any affairs or ambiguous relationships with other women. The police collected all necessary information. Song Yen then took her mother home, arranged Mr. Song's funeral. The police split into 2 teams. One went to Mr. Song's company for further investigation, while the other team headed to where Song Yen found his car, looking for any additional clues. The first police team to arrive at the company was greeted by the director's secretary, a 25-year-old woman named Chin Jiawei. When the police asked her about the last time she saw her boss, Chin Jiawei thought for a moment and then replied, "The last time I saw the director was on the evening of April 1st. After work, he had a meeting with some foreign partners and asked me to prepare some documents. After I handed him the documents, he left with another assistant named Lin Ing. The next day I came to work, but the director didn't show up. Song Yen also called the office looking for him, but couldn't reach him. Later that evening, she came to the office to check, and then left. We've all been searching for the director these past few days. I can't believe he's been murdered." At this point, Chin Jiawei broke down in tears. She expressed that she had a very high regard for Director Song. The police noted her emotions as she spoke. Although she seemed to speak fondly of him, her eyes showed extreme hatred. The police suspected that Chin Jiawei might be involved, but they had no evidence yet, so they left. Next, the police sought out the other assistant, Lin Ing. This 20-year-old recent graduate from Nanjing University was a standout in economics, which is why she quickly landed the role of assistant to Mr. Song. When the police found Lin Ing, she was busy handling matters related to the resort project in the suburbs. Surprised by the police's visit, she was informed that Mr. Song Dingyuan had died. Lin Ing expressed that she had no knowledge of this, as she had been on a business trip to Yunnan since April 3rd. She was only aware that Mr. Song had gone missing. Lin Ing went to the police station to give her statement. She recounted that on the night of April 1st, accompanied Mr. Song to a business meeting. After the meeting concluded, she left, unaware of Mr. Song's subsequent whereabouts. Lin Ing couldn't provide any further information about who Mr. Song might have met, as the business partner required their identity to remain confidential until the project's completion. The police didn't gain any useful information from her and let her go. During the questioning, although Linning claimed she didn't know where Mr. Song had gone, her face showed clear signs of tension. To ensure she was telling the truth, the police assigned a small team to discreetly monitor her. If anything suspicious arose, they would be informed immediately. Another police team went to the location where Mr. Song Dingyuan's car was found. According to Song Yen, she had the car brought home to prevent the incident from spreading. The car's interior remained untouched. The police inspected the scene but found no tire tracks due to the rain, and there were no houses nearby. They then checked Mr. Song's car in his garage. Mud from the suburban area still clung to the tires. Song Yen mentioned that her father was very meticulous about cleanliness and would wash his car every few days. The last wash was on April 1st. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination and found a few light brown hairs under the passenger seat. Since both Mrs. Zirong and Song Yen had black hair, these brown hairs likely belonged to another woman who might be linked to Mr. Song Dingyuan's death. The police collected the hair sample for comparison. Currently, there are 2 individuals with brown hair who had the opportunity to interact with Mr. Song Dingyuan before his death, Chen Jiahui and Linning. For now, the police decided to discreetly monitor these 2 to avoid alerting them. They would only move in once something suspicious was detected. Meanwhile, after a long period of rest, Mr. Song Dingyuan's wife, Zirong, was stable enough to be interviewed at the police station. She revealed, "My husband and I have been emotionally distant for a long time, but we pretended to be happy for our daughter Song Yan's sake. After giving birth to Song Yan, my health deteriorated. Even if I could get pregnant again, it was unlikely I could carry the baby to term. Back then, I thought time and care would heal my body. 2 years later, I got pregnant again. Despite my efforts, my body was too weak, and I miscarried in the 3rd month. Since then, the rift between my husband and me deepened, but we never attempted to reconcile. We've stayed together until now only for Song Yin. I knew my husband was having an affair. At first, I tried to stop it, but I realized there was nothing I could do to change the situation, so I turned a blind eye. The person he was involved with is his assistant, Chen Jiahui. I have evidence to prove it." With that, Mrs. Zirong took a stack of photos from her bag. The pictures showed Song Dingyuan and Chen Jiahui in various intimate poses. In some, Mr. Song was holding Chen Jiahui by the waist. In others, they were kissing. However, the police noted that Chen Jiahui's face always showed resistance and discomfort. None of the photos showed her reciprocating Mr. Song's advances happily. The police found this puzzling and asked Mrs. Zirong if she knew why, but she shook her head indicating she didn't know. Mrs. Zirong added that although she knew about the affair, she didn't want to make a big deal out of it to protect her husband's and the company's reputation. Therefore, she had never confronted Chen Jiahui directly. This clue was crucial. The police suspected that Chen Jiahui had developed a conflict with Mr. Song Dingyuan and had killed him. The police continued to search the area around the body for any cameras that might have captured the suspect disposing of the body. After much effort, they found a surveillance tape at a nearby intersection that showed a corner of the empty lot. Reviewing the footage at 1:35 a.m. on April 3rd, 2 figures were seen carrying a heavy object covered with a black cloth. The 2 approached from the west corner of the camera's view. They stopped briefly at the lot, one of them unlocking the gate before they both went inside. About an hour later, at around 2:40 a.m., the 2 individuals left the lot separately. The footage showed them to be small in stature, around 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 6 inches tall, dressed in black and appearing physically weak. They struggled to carry what the police believed to be Mr. Song's body. Previously, when the police asked Mrs. Shi Rong, who managed the lot near the park, she mentioned that the original documents and keys were split into 2 sets. She kept one set at home, and the other set was with Mr. Song's secretary. This lead once again pointed to Chen Jiahui as the primary suspect. At the same time, the team monitoring Chen Jiahui reported losing her trail. According to the surveillance team, Chen Jiahui left the office this evening and went shopping alone at a mall. The police followed her closely, but realized something was wrong when she didn't exit a store. Upon investigating, they discovered she had slipped away unnoticed. All available forces were mobilized to locate Chen Jiahui. A team was dispatched to her home to gather clues. Upon arrival, they discovered that despite her high-paying job as Mr. Song's secretary, she lived in a rather shabby rental house. Inside, there were no valuable items, just a simple set of furniture and a neatly made bed in the corner. Her wardrobe was also cleared out, indicating she had planned her escape in advance. At that moment, a woman from next door returned home and saw the police surrounding Chun Jieyu's house. She asked what's going on. Did Chun Jieyu do something illegal? The police didn't provide details, only saying they needed to bring Chun Jieyu in for questioning related to an investigation. The neighbor responded, "I knew it. I always suspected something like this would happen. Let me tell you, Chinju has a father who is an alcoholic, a mother who is a gambling addict, and a brother who is in jail for a hit and run. Growing up in such an environment, she couldn't possibly turn out to be a good person. I've seen her with an older man many times." The police asked, "Can you remember the last time you saw her with this man?" The neighbor thought for a moment and said, "I believe it was around noon on April 2nd. I was cooking and saw her leave the house. There was a middle-aged man waiting at the gate. I haven't seen that man around here since then." The police showed her a photo of Mr. Song, and she confirmed that he was the man she had seen. The police collected a few strands of hair left in Chinju's house to compare with the sample found in Mr. Song's car, then left. Meanwhile, the team monitoring Linning reported that she was heading out, carrying a large bag, seemingly planning to flee. The command was given to discreetly follow her. They suspected Linning might be planning to escape with Chin Jiewei. Arresting her immediately could scare Chin Jiewei into fleeing first. The police quietly tailed Linning. When she reached the train station and met Chin Jiewei in a secluded corner, the police moved in and arrested them both. Within 10 minutes, Linning and Chin Jiewei surrendered and were taken to the station for questioning. They were placed in separate interrogation rooms. Initially, Chin Jiewei remained silent, knowing the police lacked direct evidence linking them to Mr. Song's murder. Linning, however, was a 20-year-old, inexperienced girl. Under the combined pressure of threats, cajoling, and the incriminating footage of them disposing of Mr. Song's body, Linning broke down and confessed. Linning revealed her tough upbringing in a large, impoverished family. Her parents had unstable jobs and frequently fought, leaving the family in perpetual poverty. When Linning was 8, her parents died in a car accident. Her 2 older sisters were sent to an orphanage. Her younger brother was adopted by a wealthy family, and Linning was taken in by her grandparents. Despite their poverty, her grandparents scraped together money to ensure Linning could attend school. She studied hard, hoping to repay their kindness one day. When she was accepted into college, her grandfather passed away, followed by her grandmother, who fell ill from grief. In a short period, Linning lost her only remaining family, leaving her devastated. During this time, Linning reconnected with Chin Jiehua, an upperclassman who had helped her through tough times before. After graduating, Chin Jiehua secured a high-paying job, but then lost contact with Linning as their paths diverged. Their relationship grew distant until Linning graduated with honors and applied for an assistant position at Chaohua Company, where Chin Jiehua worked. She was disappointed when Chin Jiehua pretended not to know her and rejected her application. Unexpectedly, Mr. Song noticed Linning and hired her the next day, dragging her into a web of exploitation and abuse. Chin Jiehua had initially tried to protect Linning, but was eventually forced to comply with Mr. Song's demands. She became determined to stop Mr. Song's abuse, and concocted a plan with Linning to kill him and dispose of his body, leading to the events that followed. Later, Linning graduated with honors. She saw a job posting for an assistant position at Chaohua Company, and decided to apply. To her surprise, the interviewer was Chun Jieyue. Linning was thrilled, thinking Chun Jieyue would recognize her efforts and hire her. However, Chun Jieyue acted like she didn't know Linning and rejected her application without hesitation. Linning was extremely disappointed. As she was leaving, she accidentally bumped into director Song Dingyuan. Seeing her face, he couldn't help but ask her name and why she was there. Linning honestly replied that she had come for an interview but was turned down. Mr. Song simply smiled and walked away. The next day, Linning received a notification that she had been hired. When she started working at the company, she learned that it was Mr. Song who had hired her. Linning felt very grateful to him for giving her the opportunity, not realizing she had walked into a trap. Initially, Song Dingyuan rarely interacted with Linning, but after her 3-month probation period ended, everything changed. Linning was told she had to go on a 3-day business trip to Yunnan with the director. She naively thought this would be a great opportunity for learning and growth. However, once they arrived, Song Dingyuan took Linning to a clothing store and picked out a tight-fitting dress for her. He then brought her to a luxury hotel. She entered a large room where 3 or 4 men around Song Dingyuan's age were waiting. As soon as Linning stepped in, one of them approached her, handed her a drink, and forced her to consume it. Linning tried to seek help from Mr. Song, but he ignored her. The men continued to force her to drink. She attempted to escape, but the door was locked. The men didn't pretend anymore. They surrounded Linning, carried her to a table, and began to assault her. One of them tore her dress and started groping and kissing her all over. Linning struggled to break free, but was overpowered by the 4 or 5 men. They took turns raping her, ignoring her cries and pleas for mercy. That night became the most horrifying memory of Lin Ying's life. She never imagined she would fall into the hands of such beasts and endure such physical and emotional trauma. Afterward, Linning wanted to take Mr. Song and his accomplices to court, but she lacked evidence and money. Moreover, Mr. Song had a recording of the assault and threatened to release it if she spoke out. For a 20-year-old girl, this was a devastating blow. Linning even contemplated suicide to escape her torment. At her lowest point, Chen Jieyue reappeared in her life, offering to help Lin and get revenge. The two of them devised a plan to lure Song Dingyuan out and kill him. On April 2nd, Chen Jieyue found an excuse to meet Mr. Song. To keep his affair a secret from his wife and daughter, he lied, saying he had to meet a business partner. Around noon, he picked Chen Jieyue up from her home and took her to a house he had purchased in the suburbs. This house was conveniently close to the plot where Chaohua Company planned to build a resort. In the car, Chen Ju overheard Mr. Song making vulgar remarks about Linning, further solidifying her resolve to kill him. Upon arrival, while Mr. Song was showering, Chen Ju slipped a sleeping pill into his orange juice. When he drank it, he quickly became dizzy and collapsed. Chen Ju called Linning over, and together they tied him up. When Mr. Song regained consciousness, they tortured him with a knife until he died. Linning then created a diversion by driving Mr. Song's car to the empty lot where the resort was planned. She returned and helped Chen Jieyue move his body to an empty lot near the park. They chose this location because it was owned by the company and used and had no cameras or frequent visitors. Chen Jieyue, who had the keys, knew it would be an ideal spot. The two women dug a shallow grave, but due to their limited strength, the grave was not deep enough, causing Mr. Song's body to resurface. After hearing Lin Ying's account, the police asked who the mastermind behind the plan was. Linning admitted that she had devised the plan and killed Mr. Song, while Chen Ju only assisted her. The police informed Chen Ju of Lin Ying's confession. Chen Ju then broke her silence, claiming she was the one who planned and executed the murder, and that Linning was merely coerced into helping. The police doubted her story, prompting Chen Ju to share her life story to explain her motive for killing Mr. Song. Chen Ju, like Linning, had a difficult childhood. As the eldest child, she had to manage everything at home. Her parents were both addicts, her father to alcohol and her mother to gambling, and her younger brother had a disability. When Chen Jieyue reached middle school, her parents wanted her to quit school to work, but she refused. She sought help from her teachers and child protection services, eventually forcing her parents to let her continue her education. This, however, only deepened their resentment towards her. Mr. Chen often went out drinking with friends and would come home late, looking for reasons to berate or sometimes beat Chen Jieyue. Mrs. Chun, addicted to gambling, sold off valuable items to fund her habit. If she won, she would give Chen Jieyue a small allowance. If she lost, she would take out her anger on her. Her brother, a bully, frequently harassed Chen Jieyue and forced her to work extra jobs to support his lifestyle. Despite this, Chen Jieyue persevered, determined to finish high school and save enough money for college, planning to escape her nightmarish home. When Chen Jiehua was 17, her brother got involved in a robbery with a gang. During a police chase, the driver caused an accident. The driver blamed Chen Jiehua's brother, leading to his arrest. Her parents, unable to pay the restitution, demanded Chen Jiehua's savings. When she refused, they beat her and threw her out. Chen Jiehua struggled to balance school and work, but was fortunate to have a kind teacher who provided her shelter. She eventually graduated and entered university, finally escaping her abusive home. However, her parents continued to harass her at school until she agreed to support them financially. As time went on, Chen Jieyue was close to completing her studies. It was then that she ran into Linning. They quickly became close friends, almost like sisters. Linning often helped her deal with the troubles caused by her parents. After graduating, Chun Jae landed a job at Chaohua Company, not realizing it would become her personal hell. Initially, she believed that hard work would lead to success, just as Linning had thought. One day after finishing her work, Chun Jae was called into Mr. Song's office. He offered her a glass of juice. After drinking it, she felt dizzy and weak. When she tried to leave, Mr. Song restrained her and raped her. When she regained consciousness, she felt immense physical pain and shame, leading to a long period of depression. She lacked the courage to quit or report the incident to the police. Despite the trauma, Chun Jae continued working at Chaohua, resigning herself to using her body to gain benefits. For her, money was the priority, and she aimed to save enough to leave. She also didn't want other girls to suffer the same fate, so she would reject female applicants for the secretary position. Things seemed to progress as planned until Linning applied for the position. Wanting to protect her friend from the same fate, Chun Jae rejected her. However, Linning caught Mr. Song's attention and was eventually hired. During their time at the company, Chun Jae tried to shield Linning from Mr. Song. But Mr. Song sent Chun Jae on a business trip and took Linning to Yunnan, where he and his friends assaulted her. After the incident, Linning confided in Chun Jae, who in a fit of rage, planned to kill Mr. Song and dispose of his body. Both women confessed to the murder. The police took them to the crime scene to reconstruct the events. Chun Jae was able to recount everything easily, while Linning broke down in tears. Forensic analysis confirmed that the hair sample from Mr. Song's car matched Chun Jae's. With both witness testimony and physical evidence, the court sentenced Chun Jae to death for the brutal nature of the crime. Linning received a 15-year prison sentence for being an accomplice. During the crime, Linning was so terrified that she covered her eyes, and all the injuries on Mr. Song were inflicted by Chun Jae. Linning only helped to dispose of the body, which is why her sentence was lighter. In life, many people don't get to choose their paths. Chun Jae once had a promising future, but individuals like Song Dingyuan turned her into a cold-blooded killer. Hopefully, Linning will be able to start over and live a better life once she is released. Story 5. We will delve into what is considered one of the most brutal cases in Singapore's history. It was so horrifying that it even haunted the most seasoned investigators. A 23-year-old girl from Myanmar, named Pyong, Naidan left her homeland with dreams of a better life when she arrived in the unfamiliar country of Singapore. She believed that through her hard work and determination, she could change the lives of her family and herself. However, for over a year, she endured inhumane torture that can only be described as hellish. So, what exactly happened to Pyong Nidon? She was born on June 13, 1992, in a remote village in Chin State, Myanmar. Her parents were farmers. At that time, Myanmar's economy was extremely underdeveloped, and Chin was one of the poorest states in the country. Their village was nestled deep in the mountains, about 43 miles of rugged terrain from the nearest town. Life was incredibly difficult there, to the point where even a full meal was a rare luxury for her family. This hardship was partly because Pyong Nidon's family was so large. Her parents had a total of 11 children, and Pyong was the third eldest. Life, already tough, became even more challenging when both of her parents passed away when she was just 4 years old. The burden of the family fell heavily on the shoulders of her very young older siblings. Over the next decade, 5 of Pyong's younger siblings tragically died from hunger and illness. Although she was fortunate enough to attend school, Pyong had to give up her education at the age of 15 to take on the responsibility of caring for her family. With many younger siblings still in need of care, she returned home and devoted herself entirely to working. The following years of Pyong's life were a relentless cycle of hard labor. At the age of 18, she met and began a romantic relationship with a young man from her village. In 2012, although they were not married, Pyong Nidon became pregnant with her boyfriend's child. However, he did not want to take responsibility and fled. Despite her family's dire circumstances, Pyong refused to abandon her child. The following year, she gave birth to a baby boy and started her life as a single mother. To support her child and her family, she began doing odd jobs at a nearby construction site. Hauling bricks and stones was grueling work and the pay was low, but she had no other options. While working, Pyong happened to hear about attractive job opportunities in Singapore, where the monthly income was at least 3 to 4 times what she was earning. Many women from Myanmar had already gone to Singapore to work as domestic helpers, and this sparked a glimmer of hope in Pyong's mind. Despite her limited education and never having left her hometown, Pyong was determined to give it a try. She told herself Pyong planned to work in Singapore for about 3 years. She calculated that with the money she saved during that time, she could return home, buy land, and build a new house. After discussing it with her siblings, she decided to leave her young son in the care of her sister while she was away. Although Pyong's family was worried, they supported her decision because they saw it as a chance to escape poverty. After making this important decision, Pyong Dan began preparing for her journey to Singapore. However, Singapore requires foreign domestic workers to be at least 23 years old, and Pyong had not yet reached that age. Faced with this obstacle, Pyong decided to pay someone to alter her birth date, making her appear 2 months older. With her passport in hand, Pyong Dan arrived in Singapore in May 2015, carrying the hope of a brighter future for herself and her family. When Pyong arrived in Singapore, it was like stepping into a completely different world. This country was far more developed than her homeland, and everything filled her with curiosity and excitement. Before she could officially start working, Pyong had to go through thorough training, complete all necessary registration procedures, and meet the requirements set by the employment agency. After successfully navigating these steps, Pyong officially became a domestic worker and was quickly hired by a family. Her employer was a 35-year-old housewife named Gayatri Murigan. The family had 2 young children, a 4-year-old daughter, and a baby boy just a few months old. For a Singaporean family with small children, hiring a domestic worker is a common and necessary choice. However, one noteworthy detail was that before hiring Pyong, this family had already gone through 4 domestic workers, all of whom left under unclear and troubled circumstances. Pyong was now their 5th domestic worker. The Gayatri family lived in an apartment at 145 Bishan Street 11, located in the central area of Singapore. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, which is considered quite spacious in a densely populated city like Singapore. However, in addition to Gayatri and her 2 young children, the household also included her 37-year-old husband, Kevin Chalvam, who was a police officer, and her 57-year-old mother, Prema S. Narayanasamy. Moreover, there were 2 other tenants living in the apartment. Including Pyong Dan, there were a total of 8 people crowded into this apartment. On May 28th, when Pyong first stepped into Gayathiri's home, she told herself, "This will be my home in Singapore for at least the next year, maybe even longer." She resolved to get used to this new living environment, even though it was much more cramped and crowded than she had ever imagined. Pyong's main responsibilities were to care for the 2 children, clean the house, cook, and handle all other household chores. Although the work was demanding for someone like Pyong, who had grown up enduring hardship, these tasks did not seem too difficult. In the days that followed, Pyong Dan worked diligently, striving to complete all her tasks perfectly in hopes of pleasing her employer. However, that hope quickly faded when she realized that her work environment was not what she had expected. Her employer, Gayatri, was extremely strict and had incredibly high expectations for everything. She constantly complained about Pyong, criticizing her for eating too much, working too slowly, and not being clean enough. Moreover, Gayatri rarely showed any signs of satisfaction or even a hint of a smile. This made Pyong feel a bit disheartened, but since she was there to earn money, she endured it. After all, money never comes easily. To avoid angering her employer, Pyong could only work harder and try not to provoke any scolding. However, her efforts seemed to be in vain. No matter how hard Pyong tried, she faced daily reprimands and criticisms. What made it worse was that not only Gayatri, but also her mother, Prema, began to closely monitor Pyong with strict supervision. Initially, the mother and daughter only scolded her verbally, but as time went on, their treatment became increasingly severe. They even forbade Pyong from using her phone, deprived her of any rest time, including the 1 day off per week that she was supposed to receive. In this difficult situation, Pyong reluctantly agreed to work overtime, partly due to the pressure from her employers, and partly in hopes of earning extra income. Pyong consoled herself by thinking that if she endured and worked hard, she would soon save enough money to return home. Time passed until October, and despite Pyong becoming more obedient and complying with all her employers, her situation did not improve. The abuse escalated beyond verbal insults to frequent physical beatings. Even so, Pyong continued to endure. Her harsh upbringing and years of hardship had conditioned her to tolerate suffering as a means of survival. However, Pyong's submission only made Gayatheri and her mother more ruthless. They not only slapped her, pulled her hair, punched and kicked her, but also used various tools to torment her. On one occasion, they even pressed a hot iron against her arm. In addition to the physical abuse, Pyong's life was strictly controlled. She was only allowed to sleep for 5 hours each night and was not permitted to rest during the day. She was given only leftover food and soaked bread to eat. Even her bathroom breaks were severely restricted. Under the relentless torment from Gayatheri and her mother, Pyong became increasingly frail and emaciated, and her mental state began to deteriorate. During a medical checkup, a doctor noticed multiple scars on Pyong's body. However, Gayatheri explained that Pyong often worked in a hurry, causing her to fall several times, and the scars were the result of those falls. Gayatheri's husband, Kevin, also reported to the employment agency that their domestic worker had many issues. However, when the agency suggested replacing her, he declined. Additionally, Pyong did not report her situation to the agency, so the matter eventually subsided. At 7:30 a.m. on July 26, 2016, which was the 14th month since Pyong had come to work for the family, Gayatheri found Pyong lying on the floor, not getting up to work. Angered, she and her mother shook Pyong forcefully, but there was no response. They tried everything they could, but Pyong remained unresponsive. At this point, they became extremely alarmed. At 9:30 a.m., Gayatheri called a doctor named Kwan Wai-chi, stating that someone at her home was injured and urgently needed help. However, Dr. Kwan said he was attending to other patients and couldn't leave immediately. He suggested calling an ambulance, but Gayatheri refused and insisted on waiting for Dr. Kwan to arrive. It wasn't until 10:50 a.m. that Dr. Kwan finally arrived. After a preliminary examination, he determined that Pyong showed no signs of life and had been dead for some time. Upon hearing this, Gayatheri became anxious and quickly lied, saying that can't be true. I just saw her move a moment ago. When Dr. Kwan saw the emaciated body of the domestic worker, he immediately suspected something was terribly wrong. He insisted that Gayatheri call the police right away and told her he would leave only after the police arrived. However, Gayatheri hesitated and instead called her husband to inform him of the situation and urged him to come home immediately. Sensing something amiss, Dr. Kwan decided to call the police himself. At 11:26 a.m., forensic specialists conducted an examination and found that the victim, Pyong Jae-don, who was 24 years old, weighed only 53 pounds. With such severe malnutrition and a weight like that, even normal daily life would have been challenging, let alone regular household work. According to her medical records, when Pyong first arrived at the household on May 18, 2016, she weighed 86 pounds. In 14 months, her weight had decreased by 38%. Additionally, there were at least 31 new injuries and 47 older ones on her body. Her right arm had burns from an iron, her neck was covered in injuries, and her hyoid bone was fractured. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation following severe trauma to the neck. Based on the findings, the police concluded that Pyong Jae-don had endured prolonged inhumane abuse before her death, and the primary suspects were her employer, Gayatheri, and her family. The police immediately arrested Gayatheri and her mother. Her husband, Kevin, who was a police officer, was also arrested in the following days. Gayatheri Mayura Gayan and her mother were charged with first-degree murder. Although Kevin had an alibi at the time of the incident, which prevented him from being charged with first-degree murder, he was still held accountable for the prolonged abuse Pyong had suffered and faced charges of grievous bodily harm. Additionally, his position as a police officer was suspended. Since the crime occurred within a private residence, there were no witnesses, and the suspects adamantly denied any wrongdoing, claiming they never harmed the domestic worker. This led to a severe lack of evidence, complicating the investigation. However, after the case was made public, it caused a major uproar in Singapore. A Singaporean resident, after watching the news, immediately provided the police with a crucial piece of evidence, the hard drive from the surveillance cameras in Gayatheri's home. This evidence revealed the brutal truth behind the death of the domestic worker, Pyong. It turned out that Kevin had installed several cameras in the house. Initially, his intention was to monitor the domestic worker and their children, but these cameras ultimately became the strongest evidence against his family in this case. During the investigation into the surveillance footage, a suspicious detail emerged. Kevin told the police that, at the beginning of 2016, he had removed the cameras at the request of a tenant. However, the investigation revealed that the cameras were dismantled after the incident had occurred. He feared that this evidence would be detrimental to his wife and mother-in-law, so he deliberately attempted to destroy it. Due to this action, Kevin faced additional charges of perjury and evidence tampering. Upon reviewing the footage, the police discovered recordings from June 21, 2016 to July 26, 2016. When they carefully examined the content, they were shocked by the brutal acts of violence that Pyong had endured before her death. On the evening of June 21st, Gayathir took a bottle of ice water from the refrigerator and poured it directly over Pyong's head. At 7:51 a.m. on June 24th, while Pyong was ironing clothes, Gayathiri suddenly entered the room, hit Pyong on the head and left. She quickly returned and pressed the hot iron against Pyong's forehead and right arm. At 4:30 p.m. on July 13th, because Gayathiri believed the kitchen and kitchen floor tiles were not cleaned properly, she dragged Pyong into the kitchen, verbally abused her, slapped her in the face, and punched her in the stomach. She then held a knife to Pyong's head. At 12:26 a.m. on July 15th, Gayathiri ordered Pyong to go to the window, where she tied her up with a rope. Although Pyong pleaded for mercy, Gayathiri showed no concern. It wasn't until 5:41 a.m. that she finally untied Pyong. The reality was that from July 15th to July 26th, for 12 consecutive nights, Pyong was tied to the window with a rope. She had to sleep on the cold floor, and was sometimes doused with cold water by Gayathiri. The surveillance footage from those 35 days revealed that Pyong Aiden was never allowed to eat a full meal. Each day, she was given only soaked bread or a small amount of cold leftover food. This led to her becoming extremely thin and weak. Pyong was not allowed to bathe, was deprived of proper meals, and was forced to work non-stop every day, which caused her body to become severely malnourished and her mental state to deteriorate significantly. At 11:40 p.m. on July 25th, while Pyong was washing clothes, Gayathiri accused her being too slow and repeatedly struck her hard on the neck and pulled her hair. The blows were so forceful that Pyong staggered near the bathroom door, but Gayathiri didn't stop. She continued to hit Pyong hard on the head, causing her to collapse to the floor. Despite her best efforts, Pyong was unable to get back on her feet. However, Gayathiri believed that Pyong was pretending to faint to avoid work. So she called her mother over, and together they used the cold water hose in the bathroom to douse Pyong's head. After soaking her, they dragged her into a room, tied her hands to the window, kicked her in the stomach, and forced her to sleep on the floor in wet clothes. By this time, Pyong was extremely weak. She managed to say, "Please, let me have something to eat. I'm so hungry." But this simple request was ignored by Gayathiri and her mother. At 12:11 a.m. on July 26th, Gayathiri suddenly approached Pyong Gaiden, kicked her hard in the stomach, and reminded her not to oversleep. At 4:57 a.m., Gayathiri got up again. When she couldn't wake Pyong, she flew into a rage. She not only punched and kicked her, but also repeatedly stomped on Pyong's head and neck, pulled her hair back violently, and assaulted her neck. The forensic experts concluded that Pyong's hyoid bone likely fractured during this final assault, and it was at this point that she died from asphyxiation. After this beating, Pyong no longer responded. It was only then that Gayathiri and her mother realized something was seriously wrong. However, instead of trying to save her, they continued to douse Pyong with cold water. When she still didn't wake up, they simply went back to sleep. That morning, Kevin also saw Pyong lying on the floor. But perhaps because he had become accustomed to such scenes, he paid little attention and left for work. After thoroughly reviewing the surveillance footage, the police compiled 115 charges against Gayathiri. Most of these were related to abuse and causing bodily harm. However, the prosecutor decided to pursue only 28 of these charges, while the remaining 87 would be considered during sentencing. In theory, with such clear evidence, the trial should have been straightforward and swift. A conviction seemed only a matter of time and adhering to the law. However, contrary to expectations, the trial became unexpectedly complicated and prolonged. While awaiting trial, both Gayathiri and her mother claimed that they were suffering from severe mental illnesses. In response to these claims, the prosecutor immediately called in specialists to evaluate them. This evaluation process took 4 years, and was only completed in April 2020. The final conclusion was that both individuals indeed had mental disorders. Gayatri was diagnosed with two conditions. First, obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCPD, characterized by excessive concern with order, strictness, and perfectionism, setting high standards for oneself and others. Second, postpartum depression with symptoms including prolonged depressed moods manifesting as sadness, fatigue, tearfulness, and frequent crying. Patients often feel oppressed, gloomy, and easily irritated by trivial matters. The psychiatrist concluded that these two disorders contributed to Gayathiri's extreme irritability and anger, ultimately leading to the death of Pyong and Idan. Due to her mental illness, her charge of murder was reduced to first-degree manslaughter, and she avoided the death penalty. The maximum sentence could be life imprisonment with caning, but since she is a woman, she will be exempt from caning. On February 23, 2021, the trial of Gayatri officially began at the Supreme Court of Singapore. Given the substantial evidence against her, and realizing that she couldn't escape conviction, she pled guilty to 1 count of manslaughter and 27 charges related to abuse. At this point, her defense attorney argued that Gayatri suffered from several illnesses and that a miscarriage in February 2016 had worsened her condition. He contended that her actions were not intentional and requested the court to consider a sentence of just 14 years in prison. However, the prosecutor argued that Gayathiri's actions towards the domestic worker were extremely cruel, far beyond what any human being should be capable of. Furthermore, during the time of the crimes, she was fully aware of her actions, with a clear purpose and understanding of what she was doing. Therefore, the prosecutor insisted that she should receive the harshest penalty, which was life imprisonment. Initially, the final verdict was expected to be announced on April 29th. But perhaps fearing a life sentence, Gayatri made a move. She changed her lawyer and renegotiated with the prosecutor, hoping that they might reduce her charge from first-degree manslaughter to second-degree manslaughter. If successful, her final sentence could be reduced to around 15 years. On June 22nd, the trial resumed. Gayathiri's new lawyer directly requested a sentence of 8 to 9 years in prison, arguing that the domestic worker, Pyong Naidan, had contributed to worsening Gayathiri's mental condition. He also mentioned that the 4 previous domestic workers had not been abused. Naturally, the prosecutor continued to demand the maximum sentence for Gayathiri. After hearing both sides, the judge delivered the final verdict. Gayathiri Murugan was sentenced to 30 years in prison. According to the judge, this case was beyond words, characterized by the extreme brutality of the defendant, and thus a lenient sentence was out of the question. However, the fact that the defendant suffered from mental illness was also acknowledged, making 30 years a relatively appropriate sentence. Without the influence of mental illness, the judge stated he would have had no hesitation in sentencing Gayathiri to life imprisonment. Despite her repeated attempts to appeal and find reasons to have her sentence reduced, all of Gayathiri's appeals were rejected. The 3 appellate judges concluded that Gayathiri Murugan showed no remorse for killing Pyong Naidan. After her arrest, her only concern was finding ways to reduce her sentence. As for Prema S. Narayanasamy, she faced a total of 50 charges, but was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder. On January 9, 2023, Prema's trial officially began. The prosecutor argued that her actions towards Pyong were extremely severe and requested a sentence of 14 to 16 years in prison. The defense cited her illness, tragic life, and other reasons in an attempt to seek leniency. Ultimately, the judge determined that Prema's actions were too cruel and sentenced her to 14 years in prison. One particularly interesting aspect of this brutal case is that during the investigation, was Prema who asked Kevin to remove the cameras and keep the hard drive. However, fearing a police search, Kevin handed it over to a friend, who later turned the evidence over to the authorities, exposing the truth. For this, the court added another 3 years to Prem's sentence, bringing her total time in prison to 17 years. Finally, there's Kevin Chalvam. Although he did not directly abuse the domestic worker, it was clear he was aware of what his wife and mother-in-law were doing to Pyong. He was sometimes present when Pyong was being beaten, but never intervened. According to Gayathiri's testimony, Kevin also hit Pyong, though this did not match Prema's account. Kevin eventually faced 5 charges, including perjury, evidence tampering, and causing grievous hurt. However, for reasons unknown, his trial has yet to conclude. After the case became public, The people of Singapore were outraged by the actions of Gayathiri's family towards Pyong Naidan. As a result, a humanitarian organization in Singapore launched a fundraising campaign. In just 6 days, they raised over 200,000 Singapore dollars. The entire amount was donated to Pyong's family. When Pyong's family learned of her death, they were devastated. Her sister told the press that Pyong had gone to Singapore for the sake of her son and family, but tragically, she died just over a year later. Pyong's brother then traveled to Singapore to bring her body back home. In memory of their unfortunate sister, they placed a cross in front of their house. Pyong went to Singapore with hopes for a better future, but what she never expected was that her employer would turn out to be a monster in disguise. Her obedience and endurance only emboldened them, leading to her losing her precious life in the end.